The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue named Jairus came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." So he went with him. And a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. There was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had. She was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that the power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you? How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked around to see who had done it, but the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, some of the people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. Then they came to the house where the leader of the synagogue with the leader of the synagogue. He saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But he put them all outside and took the father and mother to those who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this, they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them that no one should know this and told them to give her something to eat. The Gospel of the Lord. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. I invite you to be seated. It's interesting, on this Sunday, every year we read these readings from Mark. And just to let you know, later on in the summer, we'll be reading from John, and the readings are much longer, and they're a lot more complicated. This is pretty straightforward stuff. Jesus, who has been sailing about the Sea of Galilee with his disciples, is actually on his way back from a place called Gerasene. I'll talk about that in a moment. And he comes into this village, and he's greeted by Jairus, the leader of the synagogue. So clearly, the work that Jesus has been doing earlier on in Mark has begun to reach the people, and they know that he has these incredible capabilities. Here's a man with a 12-year-old daughter who is sick, and they believe she's dying. That would frighten any parent at any time. I do remember in my own life, parents who have had children die before them And it is the hardest thing a parent can do is to bury a child. It's out of place, out of time. And here is Jairus in a period of time when childhood illness is a scary thing. And this young woman is a childhood illness of some sort, and she may not make it. She goes to Jesus. He goes to Jesus. And at this point, Jesus isn't yet persona non gratis. And of course, with the people, the ordinary people of Galilee, that's not his character. He does something for them. They recognize it, and they hunger for more of him. He has trouble with the leaders in the Gospel of John, the Pharisees, the scribes, the priests. But with the people, they seem to respond to the fact that somehow this power that God has present in Jesus shines forth and through, and they want it. They want to know life. They want to experience life in its fullness. They want some sense of that good creation that God has made. And so Jesus says yes to Jairus and begins to follow him. And then, in very Mark fashion, he does this a number of times in the gospel, he interrupts a story with another story. He interrupts the story of Jairus and his daughter with this story about the woman who has had a hemorrhage for 12 years. And you think about medically debilitating conditions and what that means to people, because it does prevent them from enjoying life in its fullness. Now, some people, we're really good at this in the United States of America, can manage chronic diseases. But I can tell you, as one with a chronic disease, that it sure would be nice to be able to crack open a cold beer on a summer afternoon and not have to worry about either the carbohydrates or the fact that there's gluten in a beer. Sorry, I kind of miss ice cream too, but I would really love that. There's something about the smell of hops and mown grass and sitting in your yard and just enjoying the gifts of God's creation, sometimes manufactured by human beings. And I can also tell you that, it's really interesting because I found out more about hemorrhaging diseases. There are conditions among women that really reflect this, that we know medically. And to be in this place in time for this particular woman is really hard. So here are some things that we might think about as we think about this woman. Number one, she has a medical condition that she doesn't really want people to know about because it makes her ritually impure. And so therefore, she can't really interact with the people around her. Blood is a thing in this place and time where people are very cautious about it. Blood is not something that you mess with. And for a woman to have a hemorrhage would be a really difficult thing. She would not be allowed in public. Notice how she quietly comes up on Jesus. Number two, we know that she has been something of a victim because of this, right? Said she had consulted many doctors and she had spent all her money and she had not gotten better, she had gotten worse. And those are all, and the way Mark describes that, sorry, I'm going to be a grammarian for just a minute here, are all sort of passive things. These are things acting on her that she has no control over. And then in her mind, she's heard about Jesus. She goes, if I but touch his clothes, I'll be healed. So she reaches out and touches his clothes. That is something she did. Now, I'll tell everybody, I'm one of those people who believe that even when you're acting in holy ways, It's the grace of God underneath you that allows you to do that. But sometimes people don't understand that grace and don't do things and allow themselves to be acted upon their whole lives, and it makes them miserable. And there are things that certainly we can look in our culture and say, would you quit acting on people's lives because you're making them miserable? But there's also the condition where we've been beaten down so much that we've forgotten how to take control of our lives. And this woman, inspired by God, desperate in her moment, reaches out. And as Jesus tells her a minute later, your faith has made you well. It wasn't something Jesus did. It was her action that allowed her to do that. Now, it is interesting. Jesus clearly has the power in him that even when he's not trying to heal people, people can be healed. So, God is just pouring out his energy through Jesus. And then we have this second story being completed where the people tell Jesus, Didaskalos, teacher, no need to go on. The girl is dead. Now, by the time Jesus gets to the house of Jairus, there are the mourners out there weeping, wailing, and gnashing their teeth. In some ways, that was a ritual thing. That may have even been professional mourners who, because they knew of the girl's sickness, already arrived to do the kind of things so that we can have the outpouring of grief that's necessary when somebody we love dies. One of the things I will tell you that I've noticed over my time as a priest is in the United States of America, often we're pretty antiseptic about death. Real grief is hard to see sometimes. I'm not certain that we're any more convinced that there is a place where God is in charge, but I am pretty convinced that it's unpleasant to wail and gnash your teeth and pull your hair out. We're civilized. Except for the fact that if somebody we love has died and is not going to be present to us, wailing and gnashing your teeth and pouring out your emotions is precisely the appropriate response. And even in the Book of Common Prayer, where we talk about burial offices, at the end, even though it says this is an Easter service where we acknowledge hope in resurrection, it's a service where grief and pain are appropriate. And we try to make certain that we address that and don't simply say, buck up, it's okay, because it's not. Over the past year, I don't know precisely what the excess deaths due to COVID were, but that's real grief. And like I was saying earlier, we've bottled up a fair amount of that grief over that period of time. Coming together last night in the garden here, the memorial garden, to acknowledge the loss of somebody whom we love was a really amazing moment. We were outside, so there were no masks. We even had some food together. Wine and food, yeah, it's like communion. There was bread, there were blessings, there were tears, and there were wonderful reconciliations going on. The other thing I want you to know is during the past year, there have been people who've gotten sick and died with nothing to do with COVID. And even those things have been put off, those moments of grief and pain. So it's, to me, fascinating and wonderful to read this story of the Gospel of Mark, where the people are letting it pour out because they know that that's an important part of living. And yet, Jesus, who last week stilled the storm and said, dudes, it's okay, gets to the place and says, she's not dead. and I'll take care of this. Effectively. That's a loose translation of the Greek, I'm sorry. He goes in and speaks in Aramaic and asks the little girl to get up, and she does. And he walks with her, and he makes sure she has some food. Very practical man, Jesus. He doesn't start preaching a sermon there. He's like, let's get some food and let's do this. Oh, and by the way, don't go telling everybody what just happened. And that's a big mystery, and we're going to have to explore that as the Gospel of Mark goes on, because there's a purpose for Jesus's ministry, and he does some things that are contained within the love of God. But simply healing people and restoring that part of their life is not his primary purpose, although restoring life is precisely what Jesus is here for. Now, there's a story that we haven't really gone over yet because it's not in this week's gospel, because it would be like reading from the Gospel of John in Lent when the stories go on for like 35 minutes, because there's this story about the Gerasene demoniac. He's on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. He's probably a Gentile, and he's been living among the tombs. Guys, it doesn't take an English teacher to begin to figure out the metaphor here, right? He's possessed by a demon. He's living among the tombs. He is unclean. And Jesus exorcises the demons and gives him life. Then he travels back across the lake and brings more life to Jairus' daughter, to this woman who's been hemorrhaging. Have the pictures been changing behind me? That's great. Thank you, Patrick. I'm getting used to 21st century technology. Yeah. There he is among the tombs. If there's a theme this week, as we heard in wisdom, and we heard in the psalm, and we heard in Paul's letter, the theme is that God is creative and life-giving and fullness encouraging. He's a God of love. He's a God of fullness. He's a God of joy. And yes, there are really hard things we will face in our life, but that's not God's intention for us. His intention is for us to know fullness of life and love with the assurance that this God who has control even of death will sustain us in him eternally. And eternally doesn't simply mean a length of time. It means the quality of existence where we know we are loved, we are granted fullness of our created being, and that our spirits know joy. Mark gets this across in stories just like this and leaves us some room to figure out what's happening and why. Mark is not a gospel to just simply read the story, but it's an invitation to understand through our own experiences what are happening to these people, real people in Palestine in that moment. And in this place and time, where we really can fool ourselves into believing that we have figured it all out, how to control death and health and wellness, we're often brought up short by things like the past 18 months where we realize maybe we don't know how to control everything. But the assurance we have is featured every week. We come together, we remember God, we partake of his being, and we see and acknowledge his Son, who showed us the way, who healed us and gave us life, and in the end, gave his life to assure us that God's love and God's care is eternal.